Okay, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Pav from Men with Purpose. Today, I have a very special guest, Simon Bubb. Thank you, Simon, for joining in. So, a little bit about Simon. He's an actor, a men's facilitator, and also part of the marketing team for Male Journey UK. Now, this is a network of men that promotes men's work, also organizing events around male initiations, as well as other events and coordinating other activities. I personally actually attended a few of their men's circles that they're holding in Euston, in London. And also there's another one in Battersea, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. So without further ado, Simon, thank you very much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. So I normally like to start with just maybe taking a couple of deep breaths and seeing what's actually really present for you at the moment.
Well, I've never heard a podcast start with 2 deep breaths, so that's very good. I like that. What's present for me is the sudden awareness of a kind of nervousness. I feel like, how many people are going to hear this or see this? So there's physiologically, you can feel the kind of butterflies in the stomach, but I'm an actor, so I guess I'm kind of used to that.
Sure.
Usually that feeling is kind of adrenaline. So before you're going on stage, you actually want some of that. You want a certain level of nerves that gives you that. But if it's too much, then it becomes debilitating. I've actually, I've had to kind of develop a relationship with my own nerves in that feeling of. I went on just the classic backpacking trip when I was early 30s that many people end up going to find yourself, that kind of thing. So I went to Southeast Asia, and I remember as I went through Bangkok airport on my own with this backpack for a 6-week adventure, thinking, the hell am I doing? That sudden feeling of what I was really excited, and now I'm like, I'm here and I don't know where I'm going. I've got a vague plan, but the hell am I doing? And there was that kind of anxiety, I guess. And then I had one of the best 6 weeks of my life. So I almost said to myself at the time, remember this, because often that feeling in you, it's hard to know sometimes, is this telling me to stop, or should I ignore that feeling and go, hang on, this is just the feeling you'd feel before you jump off a diving board and have a brilliant kind of thrill. So I think that's what this is. It's going to be the best hour of my life.
Yeah, I think so too. It's funny you're mentioning Southeast Asia. I can definitely relate to the time when I hopped on a plane for the first time going to Thailand, landing in Bangkok and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Like everything, I was a little bit like, not starstruck, but like a little bit overwhelmed by the incredibly tall buildings and everything is like moving. I was like, wow, okay. But again, I was kind of leaning into my edge, so to speak. Like this is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but it's like an interesting concoction, anxiety mixed with excitement.
Yeah.
And of course, it turned out to be. I mean, I went back afterwards to live for like a year and a half. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but probably one of the best times of my life there for sure, which we can get into. Perhaps for people that don't know much about yourself and the work that you're doing with Male Journey, maybe talk a little bit about what your how did you get on this path of men's work and how did you discover it in the first place? Because I think it's somewhat obscure right now, and it'd be interesting to kind of hear your perspective as well with all of your experience.
Well, it was around the time actually that I went on that trip, or I went on the trip slightly after I'd got into the men's work, and it was all coming out of a time in my life when things had hit the buffers, and where I had this extraordinary kind of 2-month period of my life where my first marriage, which hadn't been going for very long, broke up. And within a few weeks, I was also diagnosed with testicular cancer. So it was just one of those moments in life when it just goes, whoosh. And I remember at the time thinking, almost being physically and mentally aware that it had knocked me into a different kind of consciousness. That suddenly you were right at the edge of yourself, and I didn't feel massively stressed about it, in the sense of, I don't remember that time as being the most miserable time of my life. I remember it as being really intense. I ended up having an operation, and then turned out I didn't have cancer at all. But just the period of living thinking you might have takes you to a certain place in your mind.
Wow.
But in many ways, it was the relationship ending that brought up more stuff that needed to be worked on, and it felt like, particularly going through therapy and all the rest of it, it felt like, in fact, that was the culmination of things I'd been working on or not working on throughout my 20s, that had brought me to this point where I was now forced to confront what was going wrong and what had led to this relationship not working. And of course, a million complicated reasons why any relationship doesn't work. But and then crucially, a friend of mine met up with me and said that he'd been on this thing called the Men's Rites of Passage the previous summer. And he thought that this was something that would particularly, he said, it seems to me that masculinity is an issue that you're really wrestling with through all of this. In fact, another friend had already said that to me, that there was always something symbolic about the fact that it was testicular cancer that seems to be wrong with me. It just seemed a coincidence, too much of a coincidence. So I was already exploring that, and then my friend said, "Yeah, I went on this thing called the Men's Rites of Passage, and it blew me away. It completely changed, sent me on a massive path to healing, and gave me a new platform for the rest of my life." And so I looked it up. It was only a few weeks away. I had a gap in my diary. I went on it. One of the things he said to me was, an element of this, it's a 5-day event. Happens in this country, it happens in Scotland usually, but they happen all around the world. One of the key elements of it is small groups. So you spend a couple of times every day in a small group of 8 men or something. And he said the depth of sharing amongst those is something I've never encountered or experienced before, and that's where the real healing was. And that was my experience there as well. But it wasn't just that. It was there's a ritual element to it. There's the rest of the time you're in either big groups, everybody in one space, or you're on your own processing. And there's a lot of, it's a very much in the contemplative tradition. So there's a lot of time in silence. And it really revealed to me that I had been too much in my head. I'm naturally a very head cerebral person, and that had brought me to the end of, that had got me as far as it was going to get me. And I now need to understand more about how to be in my emotions and how to be in my body, and that there was something about being a man that men don't find that easy. And that's the other thing about the Men's Rites Passage, is that I think each of us, when our life hits the rocks, we are tempted to think nobody else has made such a mess of life like I have. Like, what am I doing? It's that sense of being confused and lost that's really dangerous. And actually what this initiation experience, part of the teaching of it, is that in fact I was simply going through a stage that is the classic male journey. That in fact the point of collapse and crash or crisis is essential, and that from that point then you start and then you grow, and you, of course, ideally we would just grow beautifully without any need for crises, but somehow the gold and the magic is in coming to the end of yourself, and then connecting with something greater than yourself. Now that may be that you understand that as God, it may be that you understand it as nature, or simply the wider group of men, or the wider group of humanity. But I found it hugely comforting to know that in fact, I was struggling with things. It was just my particular version of what many men, perhaps even every man, has gone through. Not just in the crisis, but actually the whole journey that had led me there. And to hear things like, after the age of about 30, your successes have nothing to teach you.
Wow.
That failure is to be embraced, not in a kind of reckless or stupid way, but it's very much a countercultural philosophy that says that we live in a culture that's all about the upward path. It's all about achievement, accumulation. And as we're doing that, we tend to neglect what's deep down in us. And the problem is that just doesn't work, because unless you're incredibly lucky or incredibly blind, what's underneath will come up. I mean, I could go on and on about, in fact, I would like to talk about, go into depth about that. Sure. But I'll give you a chance to.
No, I mean, that was a very beautiful summary, very eloquently put. And I'll definitely like to go deeper. Before that, for the people who, the men or the women that are actually listening to this, that haven't had anything, they haven't had any exposure about men's work and male initiations, maybe could you go a little bit about, not necessarily what happens at the events, although you can do, I know that there is a certain level of confidentiality there, but also a little bit about what is men's work, how is that transitioning into male rites of passage, what is that exactly, maybe a little bit the history around it. Maybe a couple of questions there, but we can back to one at a time.
Well, the history around it, the ancient history of men's initiation is this idea, which is still practiced in some more what you might call primitive, but of course that's a loaded term, but other certain parts of the world still. The idea that the man, the boy needs male affirmation for his journey from boyhood to manhood. That there is a wildness and a danger to young men, which needs to be not tamed, but framed, needs to be directed. And we can, again, just as aside, the concept of masculinity being tamed is actually something that can be explored as well, as something that's potentially dangerous, the way our society has done that. But there's no doubt that young men need to be directed into a healthy masculinity. And primitive societies, or rather ancient societies, and still today some societies, would know, they knew instinctively or through experience that can't be taught just through words. It has to be done through actions and rituals. And so they would take the young men at a certain age out of the village into nature, because that was an essential part of it, connecting with nature and its awesomeness and realizing that is greater than you. So there's a certain amount of wounding that is inflicted on the boys. That's obviously, I think today we might feel uncomfortable with how that might be done. But the idea is you're getting to the point where you've taken the burgeoning male soul and given it permission to grow into a man. And crucially, men need to have another man, an older man, basically look into their eyes and say, yes, you're a man, now go. It's something about that. I don't know. I don't know if women have that same need, that same burning question that develops in adolescence of, am I a woman? That men seem to just, am I a man? Am I okay? Do I pass the test? Am I really a real man? And most men live with that for the rest of their lives. And it's how it's your relationship to that question in yourself that will define so much of the way you live your adult life. Mm-hmm. And if that's not healthily dealt with, then all sorts of problems can come from it. So that's in the classic sense of men's initiation, to return the boys to the village in a healthy masculinity. In the 20th century, there was this men's movement encouraging men to be a bit more in connection with their own souls or emotions, And our particular men's rites of passage comes from the work of a man called Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan priest, and he's a theologian, a writer, but he particularly had a focus on men's work in the 20th century, probably the 1980s and 90s, and he spent a lot of time studying these traditional male initiations, and then created, alongside one or two other people, a modern version of it. Because the feeling was that we need male elders, and we'd lost generations of truly wise, soulful men who could lead the next generation of men into wisdom and being soulful, and that somehow there just weren't those men anymore to do that. And so the plan was to create an experience that could initiate men into a much more deep and wholesome, healthy relationship with their own masculinity and their own humanity, to enable them to become elders who can then pass it on. And it initially happened in the USA, and it's been running in the UK for over a decade now. I did it in 2011. I was 31 at the time, and I was actually one of the younger ones there. There's lots of men in their 50s and 60s even doing it. And you just become aware that men are carrying so much pain. Men individually and men generally are carrying so much pain. And of course, that's not to say that women aren't. It's just that men don't speak about it. So the men carry it in a way that women don't carry it. Women share it. Again, these are massive generalizations, and there'll be many cases of people that say that doesn't apply to me. But men, that's what's so beautiful about sitting in a group of men being vulnerable, is it's so unusual and all the more powerful because men have finally given each other permission to say. So the question of what is men's work, I'd like to share an image that was shared on the rites of passage, and it's been in my mind ever since, but I was particularly reminded of it just the other day listening to a podcast by a guy called Adrian Scott. It's called the Anxious Poets podcast. I can't recommend it highly enough. Adrian is one of the founders of the men's rites of passage in the UK, having done it in America with Richard Rohr. And when I did it, he was what we call the weaver. So he's the main storyteller, the person in the big group who sets the tone rest of it. So, and he's a poet, and his podcast is beautiful. The most recent episode, he tells a story from a scene from Dances with Wolves, the Kevin Costner movie. I haven't seen the movie myself since I was about 12, but the scene he talks about is the Costner character is basically living on his own out on the frontier of the Wild West. And he finds this pool of water, and he needs a source of water to drink. But the water is, for some reason, full of the corpses of dead animals. And to have any chance of being able to drink this water, he's going to have to remove each one of those animals out of there from the depths of the water, and then he burns them in a big pyre. And the teaching on the rites is that is a brilliant symbol of what each man, each human, but the focus here is men, has to do, because the carcasses of the animals were polluting the water. And until you are prepared to go underneath the surface and drag those things out, you'll never be your own wholeness and well-being will never be healthy. So what's men's work? Men's work is doing that hard work of going into your past, your traumas, your wounds, some of which others will have inflicted on you, some of which you've inflicted on yourself and on other people, some of which might go generations back. And doing the opposite of what men have tended to do for generations, which is to ignore that and go, as long as I can stay successful, as long as I can have my achievements, I don't have to go there. And the key teaching is, if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it.
Wow.
You can think you're doing fine, but it will leak out. So men's work is encouraging men to do that hard work, and it is hard work, of looking inwards and being with your pain, being with it within yourself, but sharing it with people, other men that you can trust, and then using all the many skills and different techniques that are on offer to help you work through it. And it's not just about looking inwards. The long-term aim is that you will then be of service to your community.
Yeah, you give back.
When you give back, yeah.
Wow, I've never. I remember watching Dancing with the Wolves with Kevin Costner, but I don't remember that particular scene and the way you like the metaphor that was actually given. I was like, whoa, okay, that's incredibly deep. Wow.
Yeah, it really struck me when I heard it on the Rites of Passage. It's lived with me ever since. It might be a deleted scene in the movie. I'm not quite sure, but because I haven't, as I say, I haven't seen it for 30 years or something. But
okay.
Yeah,
I'll definitely need to go and revisit that movie for sure. But wow, you've put it in a very, very beautiful way. Let's maybe touch a little bit about why, knowing what you've been through right now, why is it, do you think, that most men, and again, I'm hugely generalizing, there's a lot of men actually stepping into and doing this work. What do you think most men are maybe shying away from it? Is it the fact that maybe something like this isn't popular enough in our current society and culture? Is it because there's a lot of resistance from men? What's your take on that?
There is an ongoing question, isn't there? What is innate? Is there something about the male soul which is just has always been there, and how much of it is culturally led? I don't really know the answers to that, and I don't want to get into it today because there's just different opinions about it. What I do know is that there is such a thing as a male experience that most men would say, yeah, that resonates with me. And that experience is, there is an inner resistance to talking about your problems. And as I say, I don't know if that's something completely innate that drives us to want to be self-sufficient and want to be strong. I think, I mentioned earlier that every man has that question burning in them. Am I a real man? And I think that's, for most men, that's intimately connected to the question of, am I strong? We want to feel the strength in our own body and the way we are in the world. And so we're frightened of weakness. We have such a sense that to be a man is to be strong, that we don't give ourselves permission to be weak. And so admitting failure or spending time with wounds feels like weakness. Plus there is huge societal pressure. And that goes back, I think, culturally, for potentially thousands of years, that men's job was to go to war and protect the tribe and go on the hunt. And in our times, it was to go to war again. We needed men to do that, and so it served society for men to bottle up their feelings. I mean, in our country, certainly, what we call the officer class of men who were educated at private schools, public schools as we called them, rather weirdly, but they were specifically. I mean, I went to a private school, and it was less like that, but still an element of it. You're being trained to run the empire. You're being trained to be in charge of the British Empire, which might mean going out to some colonial somewhere in India or wherever. And your emotions are not helpful in that regard. They need to be kept in check, like the natives. And I still think in our culture we've got some of that going on, but there has been a massive shift in the last couple of decades. So something massive is happening, particularly in the last 5 years. We're talking about it more, that men need to share their feelings. But there's still huge peer pressure amongst men to stay strong, to
do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot of strong men actually suffer in silence, and that kind of explains it, right? The moment you're about to really step in and be vulnerable and open up and share, immediately somehow this equates to you being vulnerable, or sort of you being weak or less than someone else. And that kind of closes everybody in.
Yeah, there's another beautiful story I can share, which I think is a true story. I was in a group, not a men's group actually, just a group where somebody was visiting who's a minister somewhere in New England, I think, in the eastern seaboard of the US, and he'd had one of his parishioners came to him. We'll call him Billy for the sake of his, just in case. And Billy was a gay man and a man of color. His job was working for the State Department's team that, what would it be called? Diversity. So encouraging. So when there's been a breach of diversity somewhere amongst state employees, he had to go and deliver diversity training. Now, somewhere upstate was a penitentiary, and as we know in America, a lot of the prisoners are taken out to work on the roads or whatever. Huge proportion of them are black, and some of the people who are subcontracted to keep an eye on them or to basically guard them out in the community are people who live locally where the road is being mended or whatever. There was an incident in this one time of racism. Of the black prisoners were being racially abused by the white local people whose job it was to keep an eye on them, supervise them. So Billy is sent down to that community to deliver training to this group of white men, and he's on the road driving down there, nervous as hell, thinking, "Here I am, a gay man, a black man. I don't know what I'm going to say to them." And he arrives there. He's taken into this barn, basically, sat in a circle of proper big macho white men with rural, I guess you would characterize them as Trump supporters in that sense of, they have a certain philosophy of life. And you can imagine how nervous he was. And this moment came to him as he started, not even knowing what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. And he said, "Isn't it hard to be a man?" And he shared a little bit about his own relationship to that, being how hard sometimes it is to be a man. And I guess he must have finished by saying, "Anybody else feel anything like that?" And somebody, one of the men in the circle maybe said, "Yeah, I guess I feel this." 2 hours later, the woman whose job it was to open the barn and let the guys in and out came, because the session had overrun, and she came in and she walked in and found a huge circle of men in tears, hugging,
Wow.
That is the power of giving permission to men to be vulnerable. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, even just in the pub or wherever. If you've just been brave enough to cut through the bullshit that men is the comfortable level of conversation for men where we like to sit, which is talking about work or sport or whatever. If you just are brave enough to cut through it and say, "Yeah, I'm struggling in this way," or even just talking about men's work. I've been in that experience where suddenly it can, I guess it could go the other way. Sometimes men will close ranks and go, gay, sadly. But it often doesn't. Often it opens something up and you go, you can see behind the eyes, men going, am I allowed to be honest? Am I allowed to be vulnerable?
It's an interesting thing that, a lot of us are actually looking unconsciously for permission from someone else, right? That maybe the father figure wasn't there. They didn't have to go through a rites of passage per se. And then nobody gave him that approval to say, you are a man, or you're worthy, or, it's okay to talk about these things. It doesn't make you anything to do with your sexuality. It doesn't make you weak, or doesn't mean that you're feminine, etc., etc. It's just, basic human emotions that everybody, both men and women, explore. And experience.
I think that it's an interesting thing that men I've read the book by Grayson Perry. Are you familiar with Grayson Perry?
No.
So he's an artist in the UK who he's also become a sort of cultural commentator. He's made documentaries exploring different, and he made one about the modern masculinity, basically. And he wrote a book called The Descent of Man.
The Descent of... How do you spell his name again?
Grayson, Grayson, Perry,
Mm-hmm.
Perry. So it's an interesting title, actually, Descent of Man, because it's a play on the book called The Ascent of Man, which was, I think, an anthropological study, and maybe it was a TV series as well, about evolution and the development, man growing up out of apes. But the point, of course, of what we said earlier, the men's work is about the descent. It's about voluntarily going down, and but it's also explores the fact that masculinity might be in crisis, so the descent of that in that sense. But he talks about how every man has in his head an imaginary department of masculinity. So if you can imagine a sort of a board of men in suits, or not in suits, maybe an army uniform, sitting there judging everything, saying, is that masculine? Is that manly enough? Does that qualify? Does that make you a real man? And we're constantly checking with the Department of Masculinity. Am I okay here? And unfortunately, unless somebody stops us, we do that to other men if we're not careful as well. So a lot of, and he goes to, this is why the male suicide rate is so high, and we talk about it a lot in men's work, don't we? In his documentary, Grayson Perry goes to a couple of working class communities, and this is a whole different conversation, is the extent to which men's experience of modern life will differ according to your social class or economic background that you belong to. Particularly those from lower economic backgrounds have been decimated in some ways by the loss of traditional work. But also, those are perhaps the backgrounds where men are most traditionally, there's the pressure not to be weak and not to be vulnerable. And men in the pub, and so he goes and interviews a group of men, one of whom their mate committed suicide, and there's that horrible sadness of just, I wish he could have found a way of, I wish he could have said how he was feeling. But you see how they all are in the pub, and it's all about banter. There's no permission to be vulnerable. And it's just getting that first, giving people, like you say, giving people permission, giving people, and I think that's what the rites of passage is about. It's not, partly we would like as many men as possible to go on it and to experience it, because you can't really just read about it. You have to, it's a whole body and mind and soul experience, and that was the genius of it originally, the instinct that traditional cultures had, that it has to be something truly transformative psychically, that you have to really, and it won't happen overnight. You can't just do it for an afternoon. You have to really go out of your life. So in our rites of passage, you hand in your phone, your keys, your wallet for 5 days. You properly disconnect so that you can be, and of course it's not going to change everything in 5 days, but it is, as it says, an initiation. It begins something.
Yeah.
So it's not just that we want men to go on the rites of passage, it's that we want society to be saturated by men who don't do that bullshit thing anymore, who are able to give permission to themselves and to others, to men, to be vulnerable without being afraid. So actually masculinity is something that it feels very fragile for most of us if we're not careful. And that's why there's so much misogyny and homophobia from men. It feels like it goes back to that adolescent experience where you actually still want a cuddle with your mummy when you're becoming a man, but you still want, and that's terrifying. So you're in this weird relationship with the feminine, because you're aware of this little flame inside you that is your masculinity, and you want it to burn brightly, and you're afraid that actually it's really tiny. And if you let too much femininity come near you, that masculinity will be threatened and overwhelmed. So you have to, the feeling that what you tell yourself, what we tell ourselves is, I must keep the feminine at arm's length, whether that be women or gay people. I must keep them away, because whereas if you're either by your father in your adolescence or by an initiation experience, if your masculinity is affirmed, so that you're more confident and secure in it, then you can start to allow the feminine into your life much more powerfully. And part of the male journey, our organization is called the Male Journey, is to simultaneously give yourself permission for your masculinity to be wild and dangerous, at the same time as giving your feminine side permission to grow and be present. So the aim is to do both and have them in balance with each other. Whereas too many of us we're too afraid to let the feminine in. So we're not in a healthy relationship with our feminine. And because of that, we're not in a healthy relationship with the wildness of our masculinity. That feels dangerous too. So we're not living, and I'm still not, I've got a long way to go.
Everybody's on their own journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to touch upon something, because a lot of interesting points. You said that men could be in their masculine, meaning a little bit more, I won't say aggressive, but meaning a little bit more expressive. And at the beginning of the interview, you did mention something about the male energy being channeled, but also the male energy being, I think, was it manipulated? I can't remember what the exact word that you said.
Okay.
Well, what's the difference?
I think so Richard Rohr tells the story of the elephants in one of his books. He talks about how there's the elephants, male elephants, when they're young, sort of young adult, there is that masculine energy that needs to be kept in check by a senior male elephant or elephants. And there's this one particular example where whichever part of the world it was, where the senior male elephants had been poached or died, and there was just the young male elephant, and they just caused havoc, complete destruction. And they solved it by bringing older male elephants into the pack, the herd. So there is something about masculinity, about the male essence of the masculine drive, which is dangerous. And toxic masculinity, which we talk about a lot, has part of that is involved in that. I think toxic masculinity is also, in the human sense, it's the relationship between the masculine drive and the masculine wounds polluting everything. So, but the masculine drive is dangerous if it's not. Now, an individual man might come along. I'm personally never been a hugely masculine, testosterone-driven kind of guy, which carried its own problems. Of course, my department of masculinity in my head always gives. I still have it. I still struggle with the fact I'm useless at putting up shelves and parking the car and playing football. Things that men are supposed to be good at, I'm often not, and I continue to wrestle with that. But so there are certain things that a man might be somewhere along the spectrum. And actually, that is your task. That's my task as a man, is what each man should say to himself. Wherever I am on the spectrum between aggressive testosterone-driven masculinity or passive, not very confident masculinity, my task is to embrace and enhance the other end of the spectrum in myself.
That's a good way of putting it. Really embracing both, maybe a little bit more feminine essence with the masculine essence coming it together in a healthy, healthy pact. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Man, there's so many things. Like, I'm listening to you, I'm just like getting, okay, that's, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this as well. So you've been doing, you've been involved with this type of work for how long now?
Well, so I did my rites of passage 9 years ago. And then out of the annual, so each man can only do that once in his life. That's the rules we have. Like, it's not, there are other events you could go to refresh some of that, but essentially the initiation is a once in a lifetime thing.
And the reason, sorry to interrupt, the reason behind it is that it's to kind of to mirror what happened with our ancestors, where normally you'd have to go and kill a lion with your spear, and that's kind of it. You're officially a man.
I think so. I think it's also to stop men from keeping on coming back, which actually would perhaps be unhelpful in your development towards maturity. I think it's also to men. This is one of the things you get taught on it, is that men respect what they call hot edges. So rules and boundaries. So actually, when you go on the rites of passage, you are allowing the elders to be a little bit rough with you. There are different organizations running rites of passage experiences. Mankind Project is another one. Different ones will feel a little bit more warrior-like. Ours is more in the, I would say, there's more in the magician energy kind of tradition, but there is still, you're saying, I give permission to other men for 5 days to tell me what to do and where to go and how to be. And I think it's part of that's saying you can only do this once in your life, so you need to respect this process. Don't think, oh, well, if I don't get it right this time, I'll come back. No, you enter into it full-heartedly. You do it once. I think that's part of it.
I see. So it's really a calling for you to really step up fully into this, because there is no second turn. Like, really take it seriously in a sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did that, and then and by the way, I genuinely came out of it thinking I had changed from being a boy to being a man. I really did. And then there are local groups that, if you're fortunate enough to live where one is near you. So I'm in London, so there was one there, so I continued having contact with that philosophy and with other men who had been through it in a monthly meeting. And then they also have an annual gathering called the Moot, which is any man who's been through the rites of passage. They all gather once a year to just connect, and it's actually a business meeting as well, because the organization needs people to volunteer and to give permission to help out, all that kind of stuff. So and the trustees of the organization, after I'd been to a couple of those moots, asked me to be on the board of trustees, which I did for a couple of years before I stepped away. I actually stepped away partly because I was still single at that point, and I sensed there was a danger in me that I was going to be. It was actually quite easy for me to do men's work by that stage. Not my own personal struggles, that's always difficult, but to be involved in the organization felt a good fit. It felt good. It was something I enjoyed spending time doing, more or less. But there was a chance that I might be neglecting my own personal development by doing that. So it felt like, I very much believe in the wisdom of seasons. There's a time for everything, and wisdom is about, and perhaps with the help of somebody else to help you navigate that, there is a time where you go, okay, this season's ending, and now this is something new. So for me, it was a time to step away from actually being that heavily involved in the organization to focus on finding a life partner again, which I have now done, and have a beautiful 1-year-old son. So, which, by the way, I don't think I could have got to that place without the men's work, and without not just going on the rites of passage, but consistently going to the groups, to the local group, staying in contact. Because to go back to that image of pulling the dead bodies out of the water, you need help. You can't do it on your own. You really can't. And the tragic thing about men not giving each other permission to be vulnerable together is that actually, when we do, there's an incredible power. Power is such a loaded word, but I mean that in the purest sense, that there's something about male energy that is hugely beautiful, and the world needs it. The world needs men who are completely comfortable using male masculine energy to make the world a better place. And what happens, the same may well be true, probably is, of feminine energy in a group of women, men in a group of just men. Your masculine energy get the level, the echoes go round, and the resonance in the group. I'm sure, I don't know if you could prove it in a science lab, but you actually step away from the group feeling energized. And you need that. You might also need a therapist and a counselor and all of that as well. But there's something about being in a group of men who are all doing the work together that energizes you and gives you the chance, gives you the support you need to do your own work. And go on.
I can resonate with that. I've held groups when I originally started this, maybe a couple of years ago, in Thailand originally, and you could see just a bunch of random men coming together, and within 10-15 minutes some of them are crying, believe it or not, because it feels so natural to be around men, to be, like I said in the previous podcast, to come to see and be seen, and be heard as well. It's a very rare thing, especially for you to be able to kind of, metaphorically speaking, peel the onions, the layers of the onions, and to really come to what you're actually feeling. And that's quite a task to do. It's for a lot of men, it's quite difficult.
It certainly is. We have a specific format that we use for our circles. Different men's organizations use different formats. We're very, very certain that we're very passionate about the one that we use. It's called Way of Counsel, which is a technique that's has its roots again in traditional cultures. It was developed particularly in California in the last few decades, and it is used by mixed groups, women's groups, men's groups. The key thing about it is that it enhances depth, because you can only speak if you are holding the traditional talking. I say traditional because it's a cliche in men's groups. A stick. You're holding a stick, but it's a really profound and beautiful thing. You have to listen if you're not talking. There are no interruptions, perhaps occasionally for clarification or something, but generally it's not a conversation. It's each man taking his time that he needs to say what he needs to say. And then it moves on to the next person and they say what they need to say. And we're encouraged to listen properly. But the key thing for men about that is that it helps to create a container that stops you from trying to fix other men. Because without the container, if we're just loosely having a conversation in the pub or wherever, we can't help ourselves coming up with advice or suggestions. Again, this is a generalization, but it's often a problem that we as men experience, is that, and I've been on the end of it with friends who go, oh, well, yeah, it's because this, or you should try doing this. And you're like, something in your soul goes, no, I don't want that. I just want you to hear me, be seen, as you say, to see and to be seen, to hear and to speak and to be heard. And that is not, so the magic of the men's circle is it's partly the male energy resonating, but it's also, you find that the pieces of the puzzle, of your own puzzle, you'll find that another man has the keys for it.
Interesting.
And you don't realize until you've heard another man speak about his unique experiences that have nothing to do with yours on the surface, but the connection and the resonance for your own life makes you suddenly in your soul or your mind go, yeah, that's that that works. And sometimes that you might only remember one thing that was said in that evening, but it'll stay with you for the next month. And it's the next piece of the puzzle that you need to for your development and growth.
You know, what comes to mind is, I can't remember who actually said this, but it was something along the lines is the more personal something is, the more universal it is, right? It's just really getting to that
Absolutely.
point where we're able to channel it, and you hearing someone else verbalize this makes you, oh, wow, that's actually the thing I was actually looking for, but never really knew how to maybe express it, or maybe even like had a lot of shame around the whole notion of actually even putting it out there publicly.
Yeah. I think that's actually one of the key secrets to script writing I've heard, or writing of any kind, that if you make it personal in a story, if you make it specific, then the receiver or the reader, the viewer can apply it to themselves. It's a kind of paradox, but it seems to be true.
My buddy, who is a screenwriter, also wanting to become a director, so George, shout out to George if he's watching, said the same thing, said the exact same thing. You need to make it incredibly personal so you can take people on a journey with you, so they can actually relate to their own experiences, their own wounds, and the healing that potentially they need to do. So yeah, I think it's more common than actually people think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Question: what would you say to someone who is, let's say, listening to this interview right now, and they're thinking, oh, well, this is probably a little bit too maybe feminine, or I'm not really into kind of sharing my own feelings. I probably don't need that. I asked the same question to my previous guest, but curious to know what your thoughts are going to be if you were to hear a man saying to this after they've heard the interview.
I think there's no doubt that in our organization, we particularly attract men who are already more comfortable with the feminine side. And I do understand that for some men, they really feel that they identify strongly with that more male essence. And I don't want to just absolutely to say to every single man, you need to talk much more about your feelings. It may be that some men, that's not quite the right thing for them. I don't know. I mean, I think the point is, if you're feeling, I think what every man needs to I am happy to generalize and say every man needs to be in a healthy relationship with their emotions. Because every human needs to be. And it's just that men traditionally have found that harder for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Whether you need to speak about them, I don't know. But it tends to be that speaking about them is what helps you develop a healthy relationship with them. I realized on my rites of passage that I had not got a comfortable, healthy relationship with emotions. I was scared of powerful emotions. I didn't know how to process them. So I would say for many men find that martial arts or similar things are a really important gateway to the discipline that's needed, because you do need some discipline. And also, and I've never done martial arts. Partly, well, for most of my life, that would be because it just never appealed to me. It was just not something that I had any desire or connection for. I now sit here as somebody, having been around men's work enough, I sit here as somebody that knows probably I would get quite a lot out of it, and it probably would help me move on which I don't know which martial art I would choose. But I'm sitting here.
Jiu-jitsu. Start with jiu-jitsu. That's what I'm doing.
Is that your one? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm also sitting here with somebody with a prolapsed disc in my lower back, so the thought of anything not good. But yeah, I mean, I perhaps need somebody to push me to do it. But well, actually, my wife's very keen that we give our son an experience of martial arts at quite a young age. Just so
that's really gonna help. I mean, I'm not a father, but looking back, and I'm 31 right now. Looking back, my younger self, I would have loved to have discovered jiu-jitsu at the time, because you're almost like in a physical fight, but without punching. So it's like really exerting a lot of power, and a lot of tension that I think men need to really be expressing in a healthy channelity, in a healthy way. And also teaches you a lot about confidence, humility, being humble, nurtures the sense of camaraderie. But again, maybe I'm biased. I've tried also boxing and kickboxing for a little bit. I found that jiu-jitsu is quite intimate. You're like really hugging another man or a woman for that matter. So it does come with risks like every other martial art, because it is a martial art. But if I was to choose, then I'd definitely be my number one choice.
Thank you. I'll bear that in mind. So maybe if I take him to jiu-jitsu or whatever, then I can do it with him, and that'd be a way in. So I think for the man who you spoke about, who is initially thinking, well, I can't see myself talking about my feelings, I don't see I want to, then the question always goes back to, are you what's going on in your life? Are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling that you're constantly bumping up against the same problems that are making you unhappy or the people around you unhappy? If that's the case, then do something about it. Don't just give in. Don't just think it'll go away on its own, because it won't. Now, I would say, because this background I've become used to, go to a men's group and talk about it, as well as perhaps therapy or whatever. But for many men, maybe that's not the gateway. Maybe you need to be around martial arts for a bit, or to be, I think, just have a part of just to any man, be aware, is there a voice in your head that's giving you a hard time about, am I a real man? And what conversation could I have with that voice in my head that might give me a bit more autonomy over it? Who's running this conversation?
That's a good advice. I should probably preface this by saying that men's work in men's circles is predominantly where we actually sit down and talk with another man, or if it's to do one-on-one or in a group circle, the way of counsel, as you said. The couple of events that I've been to, particularly retreats, more of probably resembling what you've experienced with rites of passage. There's a lot of actually activity. It's not just you sitting there and talking. It's really actually engaging the body, sometimes the breath, going outside and doing something difficult, physically difficult, that really kind of brings this masculine, this kind of essence or energy out. So it's not just about sitting and talking. Like, the actual retreats and activities are a lot more engaging with the body.
Absolutely. It, like I said before, you can't just read about this in books. You can't just hear about it in podcasts. You have to embody it,
experience it, right? Exactly. I was hearing, I'm working with someone right now. His name is Michael Gay, which hopefully I'm going to bring also on the podcast. He's saying that sometimes whenever let's call it traumatic events happen, or something really intense happens for you, it usually occurs in parts of the brain that language is not present. There is no language there. It's actually, you have to work with the body, with the breath, with movement, to be able to really kind of face this and heal it, or incorporate it in a kind of a structured, constructive way. So I do encourage also men who are listening, maybe a little bit on the fence, sitting here and thinking, is this actually for me? Give it a go. Give it a try. I'm a little bit maybe biased again because this is kind of what I'm pushing in terms of the message out there. But by all means, go to certain events. Obviously now because of COVID, it's a little bit difficult, but there's a lot more to it, and it's also one of those things that it's difficult for you to convey into words. You really have to go and experience it for yourself. You can only be, what was the word I'm looking for? You can only explain so much with words. You really have to go and see it for yourself.
This is one of the reasons why you said at the beginning, could I tell you more about the rites of passage? And then you said, I understand there's reasons why you can't. One of the reasons is not just confidentiality, it's that there is a secrecy around what goes on the rites of passage deliberately, because you have to, you mustn't go there knowing what you're going to go through. So if you give your brain a chance to plan, if I tell you exactly what each day of the rites of passage involves, your brain will get ahead of you, and you'd be like, okay, so this is how I'm going to deal with this. Certainly, that's how what I would do, because I'm very much like that. There is something about being out of your comfort zone, and so you have to have a vague idea of what the rites of passage is about, and then just go and give yourself permission to be on the edge and like out of your comfort zone, because that's where the stuff happens. You have to be in that place, otherwise if you're comfortable, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I resonate with this so much. I think especially a lot of us are actually a little bit like again, generalizing here, right-brained, overly thinking, logical, knowing the sequence of events. You might be tempted not to participate fully, which is kind of goes against what the whole activity or the whole event is about. Or you might actually not show up or support others. So there needs to be a little bit of mystery. I think speaking to other men as well, I can understand why they're a little bit reluctant to say what actually happens on certain events that they've been to or they are actually currently facilitating because of that.
So you just used the word mystery, and I think this is a really important part of maturing as a human being and as a man. And our initiation program is about encouraging men to become more comfortable with mystery. I'll say this as a question rather than a generalization. Is it the case that men particularly need to have answers, don't want things to be mysterious, that we want things logically kind of, we want to be able to put things in boxes and explain everything? And life doesn't work like that. You can have everything beautifully lined up in your life, your work, your home, your finances, everything. And then there's an earthquake, either literally or figuratively. Something happens and it just goes. Or something in yourself, you start to go, I feel really unsatisfied. Something's nagging and gnawing away at me. And then I start not communicating with my partner properly or whatever. And it's knowing how to sit with those weird feelings of, I don't know what's happened here. Or the outside world has given me a conundrum that I can't solve. I don't have the answers. Knowing how to go through that period in which we all have to go through, it might be once a year or might be once every 10 years in our lives. And it might last for years. We have to be able to have the skills to go, okay, I'm not going to panic. And panicking for men often looks like the midlife crisis, doesn't it? I mean, we desperately will search for something to take us out of that place. It could be we want to go to something that makes us feel younger, whether that be the car, the life, the affair, whatever it is that we feel that we want to do. There is also the danger for many men of giving up, of going, I can't handle this, But I think the best way of dealing with it is to go to the shed.
Hmm.
Again, literally or figuratively, is to just give up a bit. And so your sex life will just die, because that's just easier than confronting the challenges with it. And you suddenly everything becomes more bland, because that's the easiest way of coping with it. Whereas there is a way of navigating through these periods of uncertainty in your life. But it starts with giving yourself, being able to be comfortable with it. Of course, the point is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's never easy. It's sometimes almost unbearable. But again, being around other men who are going through the same journey, is what gives you the courage to keep going through it. So another key word is liminality, or liminal space.
Yeah, expand a little bit on this, because I think most people haven't heard, let alone understand what actually the term means. So I think it's quite crucial to put a little bit more emphasis on that.
So the limit, or the liminality of something, is the edge of something, or it's particularly the space between two things. So in fact, the rites of passage, whether it be in the traditional sense or the modern rites of passage, is deliberately creating a liminal space. So it's a space where you're taken out of what you know, somewhere into a place where you don't know where you are. You're not comfortable or familiar with your surroundings or with the way things are going to work. Life gives us liminal space repeatedly. So a liminal space is that bit when you've lost your job and you don't have another one, or even you've got another one but you haven't started it yet. Or it's where you are about to go from being single to being in a relationship, or from being in a relationship to getting married, or from being married to getting divorced, being not having children to having children, having a serious illness, something that completely disrupts your life, for good or for bad, what feels good, what feels bad. And it's when you don't yet have a clear sense of what the next thing is. And those times, I would say, are often when men freak out. And men's work is what I described earlier. It's about dealing with your wounds so that you can develop, work with them and bring them into a healthier place. But it's also learning how to cope with liminal space, because life will never stop giving it to us. Life just doesn't. It's complicated and it's hard. And I think actually that's one of the great lies of modern society, is that life is meant to be easy. It isn't easy. Life is really hard, but it is also absolutely full of beauty and joy at the same time. So a healthy masculinity is one, again, a healthy humanity, a healthy soulfulness and spirituality is one that embraces both and says, I know how to access the higher, healthier parts of myself and of the world I live in, which is why connection with nature is so important. But I also I accept that when life gets hard, it's not because something has gone catastrophically wrong and I'm a failure. It's because life is hard. It just, the only question is, how am I going to deal with it? And am I going to deal with it with love, or am I going to deal with it with bitterness and cynicism and making other people's lives harder? And the dangerous thing is, or the really hard thing is, that sometimes we make other people's lives miserable and we don't even mean to. That's why you need to do your work. I speak to myself. That's why I need to do my work. Not just once, but continually, every day.
Continually, yes.
Because we all, and the other thing is, we all know that, and we might have, no matter what our relationship with our father, there will always be things in our father that, and I have to admit, it'll come to me. My son eventually will go, that you gave me a whole load of shit to deal with there. And of course I didn't mean to, whatever, but you find yourself repeating the same mistakes. You can't stop it happening. You suddenly see yourself in the mirror and go, I'm doing the same thing.
Why do you think that is? Because the same exact thing came up in the previous episode as well for both me and for John, who was the guest. Why is it that we seem to be going into the same repetitive loop over and over that maybe our fathers did and just pass over?
There must be a genetic side of it, I guess, but I guess it's certainly if you've lived in the same house as your father, particularly through adolescence, you're picking up things without even realizing you're doing it. It's happening on such a deep subconscious level. So what you're picking up is the way of dealing with things, and so the men on my father's side of the family, we certainly are a long history of men that don't speak much about emotions. It's not something we're comfortable with. So I think I certainly noticed I'd picked that up, and not having any kind of fluency with talking about it. It's not just talking about emotions, it's about feeling them and not panicking about them, or not just getting confused by what to do about the fact that I'm feeling really angry, or I'm feeling really scared, or I'm really in love and that frightens me, or and I think that there is like an irresistible momentum to it being passed from father to son. And the scary thing is that it's unintentional on everybody's part. And so that's why it's really important to do your work, because without some intentionality to stop it in its tracks, that ball that rolls, that rolling ball, the snowball, you actually have to go, right, I'm stopping here. I'm going to just, you need to have some practices that enable you to have authority over your own life. So whatever spiritual practice works for you, and it's not something you can do once, you have to have as a practice that you develop it. The beauty of mindfulness or that sort of practice is that after a while, it actually gives you the sense that I am not completely a victim of my own head or my own emotions anymore. I've begun to feel that it's within my power to notice when something's happening inside me, to notice when a feeling is developing, or even notice when I'm behaving in certain ways, which the first step is actually noticing it rather than just acting and not paying any attention to it. And then secondly, to go, okay, I can do something about this, because I think many men are stuck in a feeling of powerlessness over their own lives, over their own behavior. It is possible to have that responsibility for your own behavior.
And I think it's difficult, easier said than done, obviously, but really taking that responsibility, I think, really contributes to you really stepping into more of your masculine essence, if you will, because I do hear the same thing, right? Life is difficult. Everybody's struggling with it. And if you could share, because I think it's probably going to be quite interesting for some of the men, especially that they're listening, or the women that actually could send some of their boyfriends, husbands, etc., brothers, if you will. What are the sort of men that actually come to events like this? Say, for example, to the men's circle. Well, what's your experience been like? What's the type of man, either, I don't know, family man or younger, older?
Again, I would say that depending which men's organization you have an interaction with, you might find it slightly different. But we, the guys who come to our stuff, our circles or events, are a complete mixture of ages. So we've got guys from 20s through to 60s or 70s, which is that's a lovely kind of mixture. And therefore at completely different stages of lives. So there's a mixture of guys who I think are at the beginning of the journey looking for some support and some direction and some kind of something to hold on to. And there are guys halfway through or towards the end of their journeys who depends where they are in their work. They might be in the middle of a crisis, and they might have come along, just gone, I've just reached out to you because I know something is deeply wrong and I need some help. Or there might be men who've gone through that and know that they need to keep coming back to the circle to stay on top of things, or to just keep the connection with the deeper side of what's going on. It's also important to say we have plenty of gay men in our circles. And I feel that's important to say, because this isn't a traditional, we don't define things in those old-fashioned terms. It's anybody who has it's anybody who has a male body. Now, of course, there is the trans conversation as well, of we haven't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think any of our groups have yet had somebody say, look, I'm in a female body, but I identify as male. Because we definitely say, and perhaps this is controversial, it is controversial even in itself, we definitely say it's just men. I firmly
there's nothing
believe
wrong about that. Yeah. I think there's nothing wrong. Everybody seems to be kind of stepping on glasses, but it is what it is. Like there is something, specifically for men where they could really channel the energy that's quite a heavy and needs to be held in a group environment. There's nothing I mean, we've got to the point in society where it's really controversial to say this, but guess what? There is. Yeah,
I think it's controversial to have any group that excludes anybody else, and that's for very good reasons that we've got to that point in society, because it's we want to be inclusive as much as we can, but I absolutely believe it's essential that women have spaces where there are no men, and it's really important that men have spaces, not because women are toxic, and that's another really important thing to say. What you do, what I'm involved with, we're not involved in the men's rights movement, in the sense of there's very little place, I think, in what we do for men to come along and just spend the whole time talking about how feminism has ruined the world or anything.
Oh man, that's a lot of victimhood mentality, right? It doesn't get anywhere. The easiest thing for people is to come and complain and look at me, I need attention, I'm a victim, yada yada yada. They don't take responsibility, but nothing to do with that. Yeah.
It might be that an individual woman or women in your lives has caused you wounds. Fine, there's a space to talk about that. But I would encourage any man to come who's feeling like the main problem here is women or feminism. Come to our groups and just sit with the other men and hear how they're processing what they're going through, and just see that there's something much more fruitful in taking responsibility. So there's none of that going on. But I think, just to finish the thing about the trans, that's a really interesting question. I'd like to think we would say, okay, if you identify as a man, if that is your identity, and you would actually feel really uncomfortable in a women's circle, then try a men's circle. But we're at such a new frontier with that conversation that there's just lots of questions. But anyway, the reason why I wanted to say about the gay men is that we've had gay men who say, I find it profoundly healing, whether gay men or bisexual men, I found it profoundly healing to be in a group of men where I'm accepted as a man, or just as who I am. Obviously, many gay men have an extra level of pain to do with interactions with other men, and the department of masculinity and the sense of judgment for not fitting in with how a man is supposed to be. And so it's very, very healing for gay men to come into a place of masculine energy and to be completely not othered there. You're not there as the token gay man. You're there just for who you are. And if your journey happens to involve being attracted to the same sex, it's really not. It's as relevant as you want to make it as part of your story.
Yeah. I've been part of a lot of men's circles, even events where you have a lot of men who are coming in and openly stating that they're gay, and the experience has been equally great. Like in terms of that sense, I don't make any divisions, or at least I haven't seen any facilitators make any divisions like that. With trans women, yeah, that's trans men, let's say. Yeah, that's a different conversation. I personally, in my events, I think, or the men's circles that I'm facilitating, I'll probably keep it only for men, and that's for a very good reason, I think. But again, that's getting deeper into it. People are going to start with opening kind of worms here, being politically correct. I'm not really that guy to be very politically correct, because it has an impact on the whole. But again, we don't necessarily have to agree on this, and it's a much deeper conversation. We can probably go into that perhaps another time. What I wanted to say is, let's touch a little bit on fatherhood, because you sounds like you're a recent father. What's that experience been like for people that are maybe perhaps just about to become fathers, or at that stage where they're starting to think about that? How did that change you specifically as a man, and who you are today?
I always wanted to be a father, and it's not the case for some men. It's not, I've never known a time when it wasn't something, probably the thing I wanted most in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was really excited about the idea of having a son. What I mean by that is, before I ever was even in a relationship, there was something about, I'd love to have a son. I don't know why. And so when we decided not to find out what sex our baby was going to have until we had the baby, so I had to do some work with myself just to check in, like, if we have a daughter, if there's any stuff in me that needs to be worked through there, let's get that done, so that in advance, as much so that she is as much the apple of my eye as a son would be. I don't think it was any old-fashioned kind of, all men want a son, or maybe some of that, but I think it was to do with wanting to just pass on to this, wanting that connection with another man, whatever, I don't know. Anyway, and I'm sure that I would have just been completely, if I'd had a daughter, she would have just been everything for me as well. So there's been having had one marriage that didn't work, and then taking a while to get another relationship. There's been a lot of my life. There was certainly a lot of anxiety, thinking it would never happen. And then we were trying for a little less than a year without getting pregnant. So there was enough time there for anxiety to come in. And so my experience of having a child who happens to be a son, and so far is healthy and very happy boy, my first experience is just gratitude. I'm just so grateful that something I wanted for so long has come to pass. I'm really keenly aware. I mean, I know many people in my family and friends who want or did want children, and it hasn't happened, either through singleness or through fertility or whatever reason. So I'm always really aware of that when I talk about it, and keen not to be smug. I'm just grateful. But it's also there is, when you have a child and you wanted a child, and it's the right time in your life, most of your experience of every day is love. It's every day is full of love, and it's the most. I mean, I've lost my spiritual discipline in terms of sitting for 20 minutes every morning or whatever, meditating or reading a poem or sitting in nature, which I would have used to do. As soon as he was born, I haven't got that back, because he tends to wake up before we do. And in the evening, of course, that he's asleep, so that's when I could do it. But I often have to work in the evenings, because that's the only time I can, when because he's asleep. But also, otherwise, there's Netflix or wine. But in a way, I haven't felt the loss of that as much as I would have done, because just being having a kid forces you to be present, which is a very healthy state for men, particularly, to stop, get out of your head. And that feeling of, I think it's also continued me the next step of my journey from being a boy to being a man. There's somebody in the generation below me now that is my responsibility to care for and look after. And yeah, that's what I feel.
It's almost like another ritual initiation in and of itself, right? Like becoming a father. I've heard a lot of elder men or men who are fathers already saying that really made me a man. To really become a father. So
I totally get that. I feel, again, like I say, I felt another level of embodiment into being a man. So it's a massive challenge. And I'm even now feeling a sense of, am I going to be, all the question, am I going to be good enough? Am I going to let him down? Am I, at the moment, particularly as now he's one, he's got his own personality more and more, and he has the ability to say no or to do things that we don't want him to do. So my relationship with disciplining him is something I'm working on.
Do you think that maybe there's added pressure, somewhat pressure, of the fact that you've been exposed to this kind of work? Because once you get into kind of men's work, or you go through an event especially, there is no, at least what I've seen, there is no turning back. This kind of stays with you for a long time, and you can't help yourself but to make parallels between what you've experienced on a men's circle, or particularly on an event, not so much in a men's circle, a men's group, but on an event, not relating to and passing over some wisdom, knowledge, experience, if you will, to your son. Do you think there's added pressure?
Well, do you know what's interesting is I can think of two elders in our organization who are the most wise and beautiful men, who have teenage sons, sons in their 20s, who have experienced that feeling of this is hard. And I think feeling that, I think there is a pressure of, like, if I'm supposed to be, have got the answers, which you say to yourself, I've done this work. I've been doing this work for decades now. Why is my own son just not responding in such a way, or why is he having such struggles or whatever? And it must be incredibly frustrating when you feel like you've got some answers, to feel that, but then that's life, isn't it? You bring up you're bringing up another completely different human being with their own journey and their own personality. The writer and theologian Henry Nouwen is a beautiful book called Reaching Out, I think. He's got a section about bringing up children, and his philosophy, actually from the perspective of a priest, so I don't think he ever had children, but was you're inviting a guest into your home. And so it's, I think that comes under the section of hospitality. So you're offering hospitality to this other person for as long as he or she is under your roof, and then a wider kind of hospitality for the rest of their lives. But they're not your robot. They're not a creature in that sense. You didn't manufacture them. You just you brought them into your life. You gave them your genes, and then you gave them a space to become a separate person. And I think that must be such a challenge for every parent, of how to balance that, of how to balance the desire to control with the importance of letting go. That's a whole other podcast for men's work.
Yeah, for sure.
The question of control and letting go. Yeah.
Wow. I'm not there yet, but I'm sure I'm going to have to kind of wrestle with these questions. And having really, it's going to be quite a challenge. If I'm lucky enough to, to have kids. Simon, I think we can spend probably another like 5 hours without any preparation.
Well, if anybody is still listening or watching, then congratulations. We've been going on for over an hour and a half, haven't we?
Wow, time flies, right? Same when you come to a Mensa, time flies so quickly. Okay, maybe let's put a pin on the, I'm sure there's a lot of other topics that we can dive into. If people want to learn a little bit more about you, the work that you're doing, the work that you're involved with, where could you point them to?
So the website for the Mail Journey UK, will you be able to put a link?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
On that. So you can find out just the basic information on the website, and then you'll find about the events you could go to. It may be that there's a local group that's near you. There are other organizations that run that. Basically, it's an umbrella or a brotherhood of organizations across the world that run the same rites of passage with a different local flavor. So there's several in Europe. There's obviously the US. There's Australia. So depending where you are in the world, you might be able to access this kind of thing. The Mail Journey UK is our particular branch for this country, but Illuman is the US version. And yeah, going to a local group is a good way to access it. If you want to read more about Richard Rohr's philosophy there's 2 books that you could look at. One is called Adam's Return, and the other is Wild Man to Wise Man. It's worth saying that both of those are from a Judeo-Christian, they have a Judeo-Christian heritage in them. So you would need to give yourself permission to be in the presence of God language and Jesus language, but it's not heavy-handed. It's perfectly possible to read those books and to take lots of wisdom from them if that's not your own tradition.
And also one more question, because I think it's important for people to, obviously they can go and check the websites. Because of the whole COVID situation right now, are you actually running any events? Is that done in person? Is that done in... Okay.
Yes. So the London group, we before COVID, we had 2 meetings a month, one in Euston and one in Battersea. Those are online now. So there's the first Tuesday of the month. Sorry, the first Thursday of the month, or the third Tuesday of the month. And if you email london@mailjourney.org.uk, that will come through to find out more information. But also nationwide, the Mail Journey UK does have I think it's still holding Zoom meditations, basically, where you can come and so that's a slightly different thing, because it's actually, I think it's just a meditation. There may be circles as well. So there are various, and it wouldn't just be the London group doing a men's circle, which is actually where you are sharing and talking. Other local groups will be doing the same. Yeah. Some of our groups are closed, so you can only enter at certain points in the year. London one's completely open. So yes, there are Zoom forums for getting in touch with it and being present with us. Yeah.
Great. Anything else? Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to add?
I think we've said enough for now.
Quite a lot, yeah. I think there's a lot of people need to re-listen to this to kind of catch all these insights and mini value bombs that you put into our conversation. Okay, folks, that's all for today. Thanks very much. Stay tuned for the next episode, and I'll see you soon.